Welcome back, everybody, to the News Roundup. It's been quite a week, so let's jump right in.
Yeah, things have been pretty wild.
Well, first up, we have this story about the U.S. government narrowly avoiding a shutdown. President-elect Trump urged Republicans to reject the initial budget deal, and that caused a bit of a stir.
Definitely did. I think this situation kind of gives us a glimpse into what we can expect from Trump as he transitions into office.
So like a preview of his governing style.
Yeah, and also the potential challenges we might be facing going forward.
Okay.
Right.
Speaking of political tension, we got to talk about what's going on between Hungary and Poland. Hungary granted asylum to a former Polish deputy justice minister.
Oh, yeah, I saw
He's
it.
wanted for fraud, and Poland is not happy about it.
I can imagine. They see this as a directly hostile act. It's really putting a strain on the relationship between the two countries.
Yeah, this will be interesting to see how it all plays out.
For sure.
And on a more somber note, another tragedy struck a Christmas market in Germany. A car plowed into a crowd in Magdeburg, leaving 5 dead, including a child.
Awful.
The suspect is a Saudi citizen who was granted asylum in Germany.
Oh, wow.
He is in custody right now, but authorities haven't linked this to terrorism yet. The investigation is still ongoing, though.
I see.
But in some slightly better news, Volkswagen reached a deal with unions.
Oh, good.
This prevented plant closures in Germany. That's a lot of jobs saved.
It's a big win for those workers, especially during these kind of uncertain economic times.
Yeah.
Like, it shows how important negotiation and compromise can be when it comes to, protecting people's livelihoods.
Absolutely. Shifting our focus over the Middle East, there was a Houthi missile strike in Tel Aviv. It left over a dozen people injured.
Oh, man.
It just adds another layer to the already tense situation there.
Well, this attack really emphasizes the Houthis' focus on targeting Israel. It's only going to further fuel regional instability.
All right. Now let's discuss the situation in Syria. This week, the Assad regime has fallen after a decade-long civil war. The rebel group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, is now in control of Damascus and much of Syria.
Wow, that's huge.
I know, right?
It's a major change. So HTS was formerly designated a terrorist organization. Now they're leading the country. It'll be interesting to see how the international community responds to all this.
For sure. One thing that's already happening is HTS occupying the homes of high-ranking Assad regime figures, many of whom are wanted for war crimes.
It's pretty striking. These homes are basically a physical reminder of the opulence these officials enjoyed while their people were suffering.
Yeah, it's a stark contrast. There are even reports of like a half-eaten cake in Jamil Hassan's fridge.
No way.
A gun was propped against a plush sofa in Hussam Luka's apartment. And even like an indoor swimming pool in businessman Kodar Tahir bin Ali's home.
It's crazy. This really shows the huge divide that existed there. Now HTS has to figure out how to bring these individuals to justice.
Right. But on top of all that, HTS is walking a tightrope, trying to rebrand itself as a legitimate governing force while distancing itself from its past.
Definitely a difficult situation, and a lot of people are scrutinizing their actions.
Yeah, like there was that incident where HTS leader Ahmed al-Shara asked a woman to cover her hair for a photo op.
Yeah. That one got a lot of attention.
It sparked so much outrage and fear among some Syrians who are now worried that HTS will enforce a more conservative society.
But at the same time, some of the hardliners within HTS criticized al-Shara for even being near an unveiled woman.
Yeah. It's a good example of the conflicting pressures HTS is facing. They want to maintain internal control, and at the same time, they want to gain acceptance from the international community.
Exactly, and all while trying to govern a very diverse population.
And then there's al-Shara. He's made some pronouncements opposing things like forced religious observance.
Oh, so he's trying to sound more moderate.
But in the past, HTS has adopted a much stricter approach, despite al-Shara's stated preferences.
It makes you wonder what their real intentions are, and what direction they plan on taking Syria in.
Okay. Let's move on now to a story that's gripped France. The Dominique Pelicot trial.
Oh, yeah, I've been following that one.
He was sentenced to 20 years in prison for drugging and raping his ex-wife Gisèle and inviting dozens of men to do the same.
It's just horrifying.
It really is. And it's brought issues of rape consent and violence against women to the forefront.
It's about time.
50 other men were also convicted on various charges in connection to this. Their sentences ranged from 3 to 15 years.
It's disturbing. How could this go on for so long? It just shows how badly the system failed to protect Gisèle.
But even though there have been convictions, there is still a lot of unanswered questions, like the emotional toll on the Pelicot family, especially Gisèle's daughter, Caroline.
Right.
She believes that she was also abused by her father, but she doesn't have any evidence to support that.
It's heartbreaking. This case really highlights the long-term trauma of abuse and how difficult it can be to heal.
And then there's the possibility of appeals.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure we'll see that.
And there are questions about whether Pelicot could be linked to any other unsolved crimes. And will this trial actually lead to any lasting changes in how France approaches sexual violence?
That's the big question, isn't it? The trial may be over, but the impact of this whole thing and the pursuit of justice is far from finished.
Definitely. And the trial also gave us a really disturbing glimpse into Dominique Pelicot's personality.
Oh, yeah.
The psychiatrist described him as having egomania, narcissistic fragility, emotional disorders, and abnormal sexual deviancy.
That's a mouthful.
I know, right? And throughout the whole trial, he was just so confident and assertive despite all of his crimes and the fact that he's now incarcerated.
Yeah, his lack of remorse is really unsettling. It makes you wonder if he was committing crimes long before any of this with Gisèle even came to light.
Right. And there are potential links to other crimes, including the assault on Marion in 1999, and even a possible connection to the murder of Sophie Narm in 1991.
That is very troubling. If that's true, then he's had this pattern of predatory behavior going on for decades.
Okay, let's take a break from that heavy stuff for a sec. Moving on over to Russia. The acting governor of the Kursk region reported 5 people killed and 9 hospitalized after a Ukrainian strike on Rilsk.
Oh, wow.
And right after that, Ukraine reported a Russian missile attack on Kyiv, which damaged a building housing several embassies.
So it's just back and forth.
It is. And
Yeah.
it's just a reminder that this conflict is escalating and is having a devastating effect on civilians on both sides.
The human cost of war is huge, and we're seeing that play out in real time. It's really sobering.
Yeah, it is. All right.
Well,
What else is going on?
okay, so next we have these really rare accounts from inside Iran's Evin prison.
Oh, yeah.
They paint a pretty stark picture of both brutality and defiance.
It's really something like we're getting this glimpse into a hidden world, right?
Yeah.
These women who've been imprisoned for their activism, they're enduring these horrible conditions, but they're still fighting for their rights.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're actively campaigning against the regime, too.
That's right.
We're hearing stories about hunger strikes and protests, and even they're creating art as a form of resistance.
Yeah, it's really powerful stuff. It shows just how strong and resilient these women are. I mean, they're facing solitary confinement, interrogation threats, all kinds of things, but their spirit is still unbroken.
It's pretty inspiring.
It really is. It speaks volumes about their courage and determination.
There's one story that really struck me. One woman conceived a child with her husband, who's also a prisoner, during their allowed private visits.
Oh, wow.
It's just a reminder that even in the midst of all this suffering, there's still love and hope.
It's amazing. It shows how strong human connection can be even when people are facing such adversity.
Okay, moving on to something a little bit lighter. There's this 8-year-old boy in Arizona who's being called a hero after he saved a classmate from choking.
Oh, I heard about that.
Young Thomas Conley used the Heimlich maneuver to dislodge a grape from his friend's airway.
It's incredible. He was so quick thinking and brave.
It is. It's a really nice story to hear amidst all this other heavy news. It gives a little bit of hope. You know?
For sure. It reminds us that there's still good in the world.
All right. Now let's talk about the war in Ukraine. There are reports of North Korean troops being deployed.
That's interesting. I wonder what role they'll play.
It definitely raises some concerns about how they might impact the conflict and if Russia might try to exploit them.
Right.
There have been some defectors who have warned against underestimating these troops, even though their training conditions are really challenging and they often lack resources.
Yeah.
They're incredibly loyal to the regime and willing to follow orders.
Right. So even though there are a lot of ethical concerns surrounding their deployment, they could potentially be a pretty formidable force.
This adds another layer of complexity to an already complicated and devastating conflict.
Totally agree. It'll be interesting to see what the implications are, both on the battlefield and in the bigger geopolitical picture.
Shifting gears now to Canadian politics. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is facing mounting pressure to resign.
Oh, wow. What's going on up there?
His Liberal Party is dealing with internal dissent, and his popularity is dropping, so people are starting to question his leadership.
I see.
And the recent resignation of his close ally and finance minister, Chrystia Freeland, is making things even worse.
Oh, so they're speculating that he might step down.
Exactly. It's kind of a pivotal moment for him. We'll have to see if he can ride this out or if he'll follow in his father's footsteps and make a strategic exit.
Well, this definitely highlights how quickly things can change in politics. And leaders need to be able to adapt if they want to keep the public's trust and support.
Speaking of power dynamics,
Hmm.
China's United Front Work Department is getting a lot of attention in the West.
I've heard a little bit about that. What is it exactly?
Well, it's this organization that's supposed to promote China's interests globally.
Mm.
But there have been accusations that they're involved in espionage and interfering in other countries' affairs.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And this recent case with Yang Tengbo really brought it to light. He's a British businessman with ties to the UFWD.
So it's raising concerns about how Western governments should deal with China. Like, they want to have economic ties, but they also have to worry about their own national security.
Yeah, it's a tricky balance. They need to be very careful and strategic in their approach.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's go back to Syria for a minute. The situation there is constantly evolving now that HTS is in control.
Right. They have a lot to prove right now. They got to transition from being a militant group to a legitimate governing force. And everyone's watching them, the international community and the Syrian people.
Yeah. And one of the most striking things is seeing all these abandoned homes that belong to high-ranking Assad regime figures. Many of them are wanted for war crimes.
It's crazy. You walk through these lavish homes, and it's a stark reminder of how these officials lived while their people were struggling.
Yeah, we talked about it earlier, like the half-eaten cake in Jamil Hassan's fridge.
No, right.
A gun just casually laying on a sofa in Hussein Luka's apartment.
It's like a snapshot into their lives.
An indoor swimming pool at businessman Kodor Tahir Ben Ali's place.
It makes you think, doesn't it? Like, HTS is literally living in the spaces that the old regime occupied.
It's symbolic.
Are they going to actually dismantle Assad's legacy? Or are they just going to become another version of the same thing?
That's the big question. Will HTS hold these individuals accountable for the crimes they allegedly committed?
That's the test. How committed are they to actually delivering justice? The world is definitely watching.
And every move they make is being scrutinized. Like that incident where HTS leader Ahmed al-Shara asked a woman to cover her hair for a photo op.
Yeah, that one caused a lot of controversy.
Some Syrians saw it as a sign that HTS is going to create a more conservative society.
Right. But then some hardliners within HTS criticized al-Shara for even being near an unveiled woman.
So it shows how complicated their situation is. They're trying to balance their ideology with the realities of governing a very diverse population. And it doesn't help that HTS has a history of taking a stricter approach, despite al-Shara's more moderate statements. So there's a lot of uncertainty about what they'll actually do.
Yeah, their words and their actions don't always match up. It makes it hard for the Syrian people and the international community to trust them.
Let's move on now to the Dominique Pelicot trial. We talked about it earlier, but this case has really exposed some dark truths about society.
For sure.
50 men were convicted, including Pelicot himself. He got 20 years.
It's a start.
But the fact that this abuse went on for so long and involved so many people is just terrifying.
It forces us to confront the reality that rape culture exists and that the systems that are supposed to protect people have failed.
And the question is, what can we do to prevent this from happening again? How do we turn all this outrage and conversation into real change?
We need to look at everything. The laws, education, people's attitudes, and we have to make sure that perpetrators are held accountable.
Yeah, it's about more than just legal consequences. We need to create a culture of respect and empathy.
It's a long process. But the Pelicot trial might be the thing that finally pushes society in the right direction.
And looking more closely at Dominique Pelicot himself, the psychiatric evaluation was pretty disturbing.
Yeah.
He was described as having egomania, narcissistic fragility, emotional disorders, and abnormal sexual deviancy.
Wow. And throughout the trial, he remains so confident and assertive.
Exactly. That lack of remorse is really unsettling.
Makes you wonder if he'll ever actually be rehabilitated. And what if there are more victims out there, people we don't even know about yet?
Right. We mentioned this before, but there are those potential links to the assault on Marion in 1999 and possibly even the murder of Sophie Narm in 1991.
It's possible that Gisèle's case is just one small part of a much larger pattern of abuse.
Let's take a moment to process all that. These are some pretty intense stories.
Yeah, no kidding. It's important to acknowledge how heavy this all is and the impact it has on individuals and on society as a whole.
Okay, let's turn our attention to Italy now. Matteo Salvini, the former interior minister, has been convicted of kidnapping.
Kidnapping? Really?
Yeah. He blocked a migrant rescue ship, and that sparked a whole debate about national security versus humanitarian
I
obligations.
see.
Salvini argued that he was just protecting Italy's borders and preventing illegal immigration.
Which is a big issue in Europe right now.
But his critics say that he broke international law and put the lives of vulnerable migrants at risk.
Yeah, it's a tough situation.
This case really highlights the challenges that Europe is facing with migration and the rise of populism. And it raises important questions about how far politicians can go and whether they're being held accountable for their actions.
This is such a complex issue, and there aren't any easy answers. The Salvini case just shows how important it is to have nuanced discussions and to create policies that address both security concerns and humanitarian principles.
Okay, so let's talk about China's United Front Work Department. It's been making headlines in the West and causing a bit of a stir.
Oh yeah, this organization's been getting a lot of attention lately. They're tasked with promoting China's interests around the world, but there have been some accusations of espionage and interfering in other countries' affairs.
It's like something out of a spy movie. And this case with Yang Tengbo really highlights the issue. He's a British businessman with ties to the UFWD.
Yeah, it raises some serious questions about how Western governments can engage with China while also protecting their own national security and individual freedoms. It's a delicate balancing act for sure.
For sure. Okay, so let's circle back to those accounts from inside Iran's Evin prison. It's really inspiring to see the strength and resilience of these women.
It's incredible, isn't it? They're enduring horrific conditions, solitary confinement, interrogation threats, but they're still fighting for their rights and actively campaigning against the regime.
Their stories are so powerful. Hunger strikes protests, creating art as a form of resistance.
It's a testament to the human spirit and its ability to resist even in the darkest of places. It's really remarkable.
And that story about the woman who conceived a child with her husband during their loud private visits really stayed with me.
Oh yeah, that one was especially poignant. Even in the midst of so much suffering, there's still love and hope. It's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely. Okay, moving on to a more lighthearted story. We have this 8-year-old boy in Arizona who's being hailed as a hero for saving his classmate from choking.
Oh yeah, little Thomas Conley, what a brave kid.
He used the Heimlich maneuver to dislodge a grape from his friend's airway. It's just incredible to see someone so young act so quickly and bravely in a crisis.
It's a good reminder that heroism can come in all shapes and sizes and that even small acts of courage can have a big impact. It's a nice little glimmer of hope in the midst of all the heavier news.
Absolutely. Okay, shifting gears back to the war in Ukraine, there's been a new development with the deployment of North Korean troops.
That's definitely a concerning development. Adds another layer of complexity to an already complicated and devastating conflict. It raises questions about what role they'll play and if Russia might try to exploit them in some way.
And there have been defectors who've warned against underestimating these troops. They may have limited resources and face challenging training conditions, but they're fiercely loyal to the regime and willing to follow orders.
It's a troubling situation from both a strategic and ethical standpoint. The implications for the war itself and for those soldiers are pretty significant.
Closer to home, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is facing growing pressure to resign.
Yeah, things aren't looking so good for him right now. His Liberal Party is dealing with internal dissent, and his popularity is waning. People are really starting to question his leadership.
Especially after the recent resignation of his close ally and finance minister, Chrystia Freeland. It's a pivotal moment for him, and it's unclear if he can weather this storm or if he'll end up following in his father's footsteps and making a strategic exit.
It's a good example of how political fortunes can change so quickly. Leaders need to be adaptable and maintain public trust if they want to stay in power.
Well, that about wraps up our whirlwind tour of this week's news. It's been a roller coaster of events, from political dramas and international conflicts to inspiring stories of resilience and hope.
It's been quite a week. It really highlights the complexities of our world and the challenges we face, but it also showcases the strength and compassion that people are capable of, even in the face of adversity.
It's a good reminder to stay informed, engaged, and to keep asking those tough questions. Thanks for joining us on this journey through the headlines. We'll be back next week with more in-depth analysis and thought-provoking discussions.
And until then, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay hopeful. There's always good to be found in the world, even amidst all the challenges.